Alrighty, so I haven't been streaming lately, and I haven't been making videos lately, and I really apologize for that, because I know this is going up on YouTube, and I know this will be like the first video I've uploaded in fucking days. So for people who are watching this right now that have been wondering where I am, it's been very hot. I've had issues with my dog. If you follow me on Twitter or anything like that, you probably know. I just explained it. My dog is sick. It's very hot, so I haven't been able to stream, and I apologize. But a couple days ago, I was chilling, I was hanging out, and this trans girl came into my DMs on Instagram and started asking me, saying that she's a trans medicalist, but she's interested in the opposing viewpoint, like why I'm not a trans medicalist, why I think that transmedicalism is garbage. And I thought at first that I felt like I covered this fairly well in the past, right? Anytime I've covered Blair White, for example, Blair White's a transmedicalist, and I feel like I do a good job of debunking transmedicalism whenever I talk about Blair White, because, you know, she's the true scum queen, you know what I mean? And apparently not, though. Apparently in the past, I haven't done a particularly good job at diving deep into the topic of transmedicalism and debunking it. So I figured I wanted to make a video that's just me explaining why I disagree with transmedicalism, and not just that, but why transmedicalism is just incorrect. It's wrong. It is empirically incorrect, and I'm going to explain that now. So for those that aren't aware, transmedicalism is the belief that to be trans, you need gender dysphoria. That's what makes you trans. Some even believe that having gender dysphoria makes you trans, which is interesting, to be sure, and also not grounded in any sort of reality. So for those that don't know, gender dysphoria is the distress that somebody feels when they don't feel comfortable with the gender they were assigned at birth. When you're born, or, I mean, this can even happen before you're born, if, like, the doctor uses an ultrasound machine to find out, you know, what you look like while you're inside inside the uterus, they can see your genitals, and usually that's when they'll assign you a gender, right? And I mean, this is pretty well known, right? Like, even before the doctor would take you out and say, oh, it's a girl, or oh, it's a boy, you know, they may even tell the parents, and the parents will be like, oh yeah, we know the baby's sex now, so they're you know, the baby has a dick, so it's a boy, and they'll do a baby shower where they, like, I don't know, this is a white people thing mostly, where, like, they'll hit a piñata, and if it's a boy, the like, it'll have blue confetti, and if it's a girl, it'll have pink confetti, you know? Yeah, gender reveal parties, very cringe, very white. Yeah, it's stupid. But yeah, basically your gender is decided for you before you're born, usually. And even if it's not, it's decided well before. It's decided for you well before you're even somewhat cognizant as to what gender is. So even before you're born, your gender has been assigned to you most of the time. And gender is separate from sex. I've been getting comments on my Blair White videos, like, a lot lately, from people saying, oh, you're such an SJW, sex and gender are the same. And, like, I don't know how much I can do to say this, but do even the slightest bit of research, like use your fingers, go on Google, and look up difference between sex and gender. This is recognized by the entirety of the medical community. As a matter of fact, here, let me help you guys out. I will list the organizations that recognize the difference between sex and gender. I'll list them. I'll fucking list the organizations here, just to make sure that any dumbasses watching this right now know for a fact that I am not just pulling this out of my ass. Fucking hell, hold on. Let's go over it. It is recognized. The difference between sex and gender is recognized by the American Psychological Association, the American Medical Association, the American Psychoanalytic Association, Human Rights Campaign, American Academy of Pediatrics, the American College of Osteopathic Pediatricians, the United Nations, United Kingdom's National Health Service, and then here is a list of a bunch of fucking sources to support this. If you want access to this, if you are someone who's watching this right now that believes in transmedicalism or believes that sex and gender are the same thing, I implore you to look into this data. If you want to see this this document, go on Vosh's website, vosh.gg, go into his chat and type !doc, and this will come up, and you can read these sources for yourself. Even right here, it talks about how sex isn't even a binary. So it's a very complicated situation, but yeah. So transmedicalism. Why is transmedicalism incorrect? Well, because the definition of transgender, as a matter of fact, I'll bring up the definition of transgender right now. It's very simple. Transgender people have a gender identity or gender expression that differs from their sex assigned at birth. Some transgender people who desire medical assistance to transition from one sex to another identify as transsexual. Nowhere in that definition did it say that you require dysphoria to be trans. Nowhere in any definition for transgenderism that is supported by science will say that. Now, I understand why a lot of people would take the position of like the transmedicalist position. I'm going to play devil's advocate for a moment and explain that even though it's the incorrect viewpoint, I understand why they may argue from that position. It is, if you are a trans person, especially if you're a binary trans person, and you want to explain to someone why you're trans and why being trans is valid, it's way easier to do so by saying, yeah, I have a recognized and diagnosable condition called gender dysphoria that makes me trans. The treatment is to transition. I take hormones. I dress differently. I do this. I do that. Just things that you would do if you're transitioning. It's way easier to say that it is a medical thing. That's a medical thing if you're arguing with somebody or trying to explain it to somebody than it is to say, yeah, well, gender and sex are different things, and gender isn't binary, and sex is sort of a bimodal distribution, and blah, 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 all that shit. Really hard to explain that to some person, to anybody, if you're just trying to explain it to a normie. So I'll play devil's advocate, and I'll say I understand why some people argue from that position. The issue is, it's simply incorrect. It just is. Now, there may be an argument that maybe there does need to a distinction does need to be made. Maybe, and I want to throw this out here. I want to see people in chat, and I want to see people in the comments of this video. I want to see what their take is on this. Do you think there is validity in sort of acknowledging trans people separately, like transsexuals and transgender people? Do you think it's worth like making that distinction, like, oh yeah, transsexual, you're physically trying to transition your body, your sex, right? And then transgender people who are just sort of transitioning their gender, their gender identity and whatnot. Do you think there's validity in making a distinction between these two groups? Even if there was, this is my belief here. I think even if there was validity in trying to make a distinction between these two groups, someone who identifies as transsexual is still transgender because they're changing their gender identity. So it wouldn't really make sense. Not only that, but there are a lot of non-binary people who undergo physical transition. Whether they get top surgery or bottom surgery, it's usually top surgery. Like if there's a non-binary person who was assigned female at birth and they pursue transition, they may get top surgery. I think Lumiru, I think that's their name. They used to go by Eva Unilove, is doing that or pursuing that. So I know for a fact there are non-binary people who do that, so it doesn't really seem like, in my opinion, there is any worth in taking the transmedicalist position and trying to make some distinction between transsexuals and transgender people. I don't see any reason to do it, but I want it to be a conversation, so I want to see what people in chat think. I want to see what people in the comments think. I'm really interested in seeing what people's opinion is on that. My main issue, one of my biggest issues I have with that, is that every single trans person that I've seen that fucking insists on being called transsexual and not transgender are true scum, or like full-on true scum, who think non-binary people are just, you know, pretending to be trans for attention, or that you have to have dysphoria to be trans. Like, it's almost always that. That's almost always the case. Xander Hall, the medical community uses the words differently. According to your logic, there's a distinction. What do you mean, Maddie? The medical community makes a distinction between transgender people and transsexual people? I think that if we're talking medically, there might be validity in it, because if someone says transsexual and we're referring specifically at people who are transitioning themselves, like, physically, they're pursuing hormones and they're pursuing surgery, they're still transgender. Think about it like this. You know how... Okay, here will be my comparison here. All jacuzzis are hot tubs, but not all hot tubs are jacuzzis, right? So in the same way that all transsexuals would be transgender, but not all transgender people would be transsexual. I think that's like the best. I think that's the best comparison to make. But it does make sense for like the medical community to make a distinction, simply because, like, if you're somebody who is just trans, like, let's say you're a non-binary person, for example, right? And like, let's say I decide right now that I'm not comfortable with like being a dude. Like, I don't like my gender, right? I'm not I'm not like transitioning to be a woman, but I decide I want to be non-binary. I'm not going to physically change myself in any way. I'm going to dress the same way. I'm going to behave in the same way for the most part. I'm not gonna take hormones or anything like that. But I decide that I want to go by they, them. That makes me trans, technically, or that would make me trans. I'm not actually. Hypothetical, that would make me trans, but maybe there's a distinction that needs to be made there in the medical community between somebody who does that, which is valid, and somebody who is like taking hormones and getting surgeries and so on, so on, so on. Because it's definitely relevant. It's definitely relevant, especially because we covered that Blair White video the other day where she was talking about, oh, trans women aren't real women, they can't get periods, blah, blah, blah. And she cut it off, but we went to the actual page, and they talked about how trans women who've had the bottom surgery, in some cases, can actually get cervical cancer in their in the artificial cervix that's been created for them. They can actually get so I think in cases like that, it is valid to recognize the difference, like in the medical community. But I want to hear what you guys think. But what about NBs who take hormones? Just asking. Well, NBs who take hormones, I mean, if you're taking hormones, then you're physically transitioning. So if they want to identify as transsexual, then I guess that would be valid. I don't know. I personally, when I hear transsexual, it makes me cringe because it's almost always a true scum saying it. Ooh. Okay, we actually have like a source here. I want to see what this says. Maybe this will change my opinion. This is from psychiatry.org, American Psychiatric Association. Transgender is a non-medical term that has been used increasingly since the 1990s as an umbrella term describing individuals whose gender identity, inner sense of gender, or gender expression, outward performance of gender differs from the sex or gender to which they were assigned at birth. Some people who use the term do not consider themselves as matching a binary gender category. In addition, new terms such as genderqueer, bigendered, and agendered are increasingly in use. Transsexual is a historic medical term that refers to individuals who have undergone some form of medical and/or surgical treatment for gender reassignment, historically referred to as sex reassignment. Some transsexual individuals may identify as transgender, although others primarily identify as the male or female gender to which they have transitioned. People who identify as transgender but do not seek medical or surgical treatment are not transsexual. Interesting. So it does appear that the medical community makes a distinction between people who transition physically, and they're referred to as transsexual, and people who identify, who simply identify as a different gender. But at the end of the day, my point still stands, and we learned something new, because this does bolster my point. To be transgender, means you identify as a gender different from that you were assigned at birth. If you've got dysphoria and you're physically transitioning, then I guess medically speaking you would be transsexual, but be careful using that word, because it kind of makes people cringe, because usually you hear it coming from True Scum. Almost always. Salty Ace, thank you for the tier 1 sub and the heart. I appreciate it. Yeah, damn. Nice. But, yeah, hopefully that explained a lot of, like, my beliefs when it comes to being, like, a transmed. It is definitionally incorrect. It's even etymologically incorrect, simply because transgender, the definition of transgender has nothing to do with gender dysphoria. But yeah, you don't need, by definition, you do not need gender dysphoria to be trans. Yeah. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this, and hopefully you learned something new.